Your loyalty is the weapon they use to control you, and you handed it to them willingly. The loyalty trap isn't about betrayal. It's about the calculated extraction disguised as connection. They don't break your trust. They architect your dependence. They turn the devotion you freely give into chains you didn't know you were wearing. This isn't about cynicism. This is about recognition. Because the moment your loyalty becomes unconditional, it becomes their leverage. And they know it before you do. Like if you're ready to recognize manipulation disguised as connection. Comment your insight. Share this with those still trapped by blind loyalty. Comment, I see the pattern. If you're ready to master this principle, you're about to discover how devotion becomes weaponized against you, how guilt operates as invisible control, how obligation becomes one-sided currency, how they isolate you while calling it care. Most importantly, how to recognize when someone is extracting from your loyalty instead of honoring it. This is the awareness they hope you never develop. The pattern they disguise as love, friendship, or family obligation. The exploitation hidden behind words like, after everything I've done for you, 7 principles. Each one a layer of recognition. Each one revealing what they hope stays hidden. Let's begin. Number 1. The weaponized devotion. Loyalty is not connection. It's the leverage they calculate before they commit. True devotion flows both ways. Weaponized devotion flows one direction while they collect the returns. This is the fundamental distinction most never recognize until years of extraction have already occurred. They don't ask for your loyalty directly. That would expose the transaction. Instead, they create conditions where your devotion feels like choice. They position themselves as worthy of unconditional commitment while keeping their own investment conditional, measured, strategic. Watch how it operates. They give just enough to establish the bond, just enough to make you feel connected. Then they begin the slow process of making that bond into obligation. What started as mutual becomes one-sided. What feels like reciprocity becomes extraction, disguised as relationship. The weapon isn't loyalty itself. The weapon is your inability to recognize when loyalty stops serving connection and starts serving their agenda. They need you to believe that questioning devotion equals betrayal, that boundary equals disloyalty, that protecting yourself equals abandonment. But here's the pattern you've been missing. The moment they can predict your loyalty, they can exploit it. Your devotion becomes their leverage the moment it becomes unconditional. Because unconditional loyalty means you'll stay regardless of how they treat you. You'll give regardless of whether they reciprocate. You'll sacrifice regardless of whether they appreciate it. And they know this mathematics better than you do. They don't weaponize everyone's loyalty, only those who give it freely. Only those who confuse devotion with virtue. Only those who've been conditioned to believe that loyalty proves worth. This is why the genuinely devoted become the primary targets. Consider the architecture of weaponized devotion. First, they identify your capacity for loyalty. They test your willingness to sacrifice, to prioritize their needs, to stay present during difficulty. This isn't love, it's reconnaissance. Second, they establish the baseline. They give enough to make the relationship feel mutual, enough to make you believe you're building something together, enough to create the illusion of reciprocity. This baseline becomes the reference point they'll use later. After everything I've done for you. Third, they slowly shift the balance. Your investment increases while theirs decreases. Your sacrifices compound while theirs diminish. Your loyalty deepens while theirs remains surface level. But the shift happens gradually enough that you don't notice the disparity until you're already trapped. Fourth, they make your loyalty about their needs. Your devotion exists to serve their agenda. Your commitment exists to ensure their comfort. Your sacrifice exists to maintain their position. The relationship becomes structured around extracting from your loyalty while contributing minimal returns. This is weaponized devotion in its essence. Not the absence of connection, but the perversion of it. Not the betrayal of trust, but the exploitation of it. They don't destroy your loyalty. They redirect it toward their benefit while ensuring you feel guilty forever. Questioning the arrangement. The chains disguised as bonds feel identical to genuine connection until you try to move, until you attempt to establish boundaries, until you dare to question whether devotion flows both directions. That's when you discover the trap. The loyalty you thought was mutual was actually strategic. The devotion you believed was reciprocal was actually one-sided. The commitment you assumed was shared was actually weaponized against you from the beginning. They never intended to honor your loyalty. They intended to harvest it. And the guilt you feel when you finally recognize this, that guilt is part of the weapon too. And this is where the exploitation begins. Not with dramatic betrayal, not with obvious manipulation, but with the subtle conditioning that makes you police your own devotion. That makes you question whether you're giving enough, whether you're loyal enough, whether you're devoted enough, while they give nothing and question nothing. Number 2, recognition patterns. The difference between genuine connection and strategic extraction lives in the details you've been taught to ignore. Genuine connection celebrates your growth. Strategic extraction requires your stagnation. Real relationships want you empowered. Weaponized relationships need you to be dependent. This is the pattern hidden in plain sight. They don't announce their intentions. They demonstrate them through what they reward and what they punish. When you establish boundaries, do they respect them or guilt you for having them? When you prioritize yourself, do they support it or make you feel selfish? When you question the imbalance, do they address it or make you feel ungrateful? The answers reveal everything. Because genuine devotion doesn't fear questions. Exploitation does. Watch what happens when you reduce your availability, when you need something instead of always providing, when you ask for reciprocity instead of accepting crumbs. Their response tells you whether your loyalty was valued or merely useful. Valued loyalty receives gratitude. Useful loyalty receives expectation. They don't thank you for what they've come to expect. They resent you for threatening to stop providing it. Here's what Machiavelli understood about devotion that most never grasp. Loyalty given freely has no value to those who seek power. Only loyalty they can control, predict, and exploit serves their purpose. This is why they condition your devotion rather than earning it. Earning requires consistent reciprocity. Conditioning only requires establishing the pattern where your loyalty becomes your identity. Where questioning devotion feels like betraying yourself, the loyal become targets because loyalty is predictable, and predictability is exploitable. They don't need you to be unpredictable and boundaries. They need you devoted and available. They don't want your empowerment. They want your compliance disguised as commitment. Recognition begins with acknowledging the imbalance you've been trained to accept. One person is constantly sacrificing while another is constantly receiving. One person is always available while another only presents when convenient. One person giving unconditionally while another taking strategically. This imbalance didn't happen accidentally. It was constructed through carefully deployed guilt, manufactured obligation, and strategic conditioning. Each time you gave more than you received, the pattern deepened. Each time you prioritized them over yourself, the expectation strengthened. Each time you stayed despite mistreatment, the trap tightened. They made your loyalty about their needs while ensuring you never questioned why their loyalty never matched yours. They established a dynamic where you proved devotion through sacrifice while they proved nothing through anything. And they trained you to believe this arrangement was normal. The recognition pattern requires examining specific behaviors. Do they celebrate your wins or feel threatened by them? Do they support your other relationships or isolate you from them? Do they acknowledge your needs or dismiss them as inconvenient? Do they appreciate your devotion or exploit it as weakness? Weaponized devotion reveals itself through absence of reciprocity, masked by language of connection. They speak love while demonstrating extraction. They claim appreciation while showing entitlement. They promise partnership while delivering one-sided obligation. The words say, "We're in this together." The actions say, "You're in this for me." And you've been conditioned to trust the words while ignoring the actions. Why do the loyal become targets? Because genuine loyalty is rare, valuable, and therefore exploitable. Those who give devotion freely are those who can be trained to give it unconditionally. And unconditional devotion to someone who gives conditionally is the perfect arrangement for extraction. They don't seek the boundaries, the questioning, the self-protective. They seek the devoted, the trusting, the self-sacrificing, not because these qualities are flaws, but because these qualities are useful to those who weaponize connection. The pattern becomes visible once you stop justifying their behavior and start examining it. Once you stop explaining away the imbalance and start acknowledging it. Once you stop believing their words and start watching their actions. Now let's examine the mechanisms they use to keep the trap closed. The specific tactics that transform your devotion from connection into chains. The precise methods that ensure you never question why you give everything and receive barely enough to stay. The first mechanism is the oldest manipulation in human psychology, and you've felt it every time you consider protecting yourself. Number 3, tactical guilt deployment. Guilt is not conscience, it's the invisible leash they tighten when you question. Healthy guilt emerges from violating your own values. Weaponized guilt emerges from violating their expectations. Learn the difference, and you learn to recognize manipulation disguised as moral correction. They don't use guilt occasionally. They deploy it strategically every time you establish boundaries, every time you prioritize yourself, every time you dare to expect reciprocity. The guilt appears right when you threaten their access to your devotion. Watch the pattern. You mention feeling exhausted from always being available. They respond with, "I guess I'm just too much trouble for you." You express hurt about the imbalance. They counter with, "After everything I've done, this is the thanks I get." You attempt to create space. They hit you with, "I thought you cared about me." This is tactical guilt deployment in action. Not genuine hurt, not authentic disappointment, but calculated conditioning designed to train you back into compliance. The puppet strings invisible until pulled. They've studied what makes you feel guilty, what words trigger your need to prove you're good, loyal, caring. They know which phrases make you doubt your own boundaries, which accusations make you sacrifice yourself to demonstrate devotion. And they use this knowledge with surgical precision. The guilt they manufacture has a specific purpose: to make protecting yourself feel like attacking them, to make self-preservation feel like betrayal, to make boundaries feel like abandonment. Because if they can make you feel guilty for self-protection, they never have to change their behavior. Consider how it operates. You're exhausted from giving constantly. You need to reduce your availability. This is reasonable self-care, but they frame it as rejection, as proof you don't really care, as evidence of your disloyalty. Suddenly, your legitimate need becomes their victimization. Your boundary becomes their wound. Your self-preservation becomes their abandonment. And you're left feeling guilty for having needs in the first place. But here's the mechanism you haven't noticed yet. They only deploy guilt when their control is threatened. When you're complying, there's no need for manipulation. The guilt appears precisely when you start protecting yourself. This reveals the truth. If your boundaries triggered genuine hurt, they'd discuss it. If your needs created real problems, they'd problem solve. But guilt isn't about resolution. Guilt is about restoration, restoring the dynamic where you give and they take without you questioning it. They've conditioned you to associate guilt with being a bad person. So when they trigger guilt, you immediately try to prove you're good by sacrificing more, by giving more, by accepting less. This is the invisible leash in motion. The debt they invented you never owed becomes the foundation for lifetime guilt deployment. I was there for you when no one else was. This becomes justification for unlimited extraction. I helped you when you needed it. This becomes a reason for permanent obligation. I gave up so much for you. This becomes an excuse for never reciprocating. They build a mythology of their sacrifice while minimizing your contributions. They amplify their giving while erasing yours. They frame their occasional support as monumental while treating your consistent devotion as expected. The scales are weighted on one side while they insist on balance. Watch what they feel guilty about. Genuinely caring people feel guilt when they genuinely harm someone. Manipulators feel guilt only when caught or confronted with consequences. They can extract from your loyalty for years without remorse. But the moment you establish boundaries, suddenly they're the victim. This tactical guilt serves a specific function. It keeps you in the trap by making escape feel like moral failure. You're not leaving exploitation. You're abandoning someone who needs you. You're not protecting yourself. You're betraying someone who was there for you. You're not establishing healthy boundaries. You're being selfish. The guilt they trained you to feel is how they keep the trap closed. Because if you can't protect yourself without feeling like you're harming them, you'll never protect yourself at all. This guilt deployment works in tandem with another mechanism, one that makes you feel perpetually indebted for things that should have been freely given, one that transforms past kindness into current currency, one that ensures you can never give enough to balance scales they deliberately keep tilted. Number 4, the reciprocity illusion. Obligation is currency. They spend yours while hoarding theirs. True reciprocity flows naturally without scorekeeping. The reciprocity illusion requires constant accounting of what you owe, while never calculating what they owe. This is how they transform relationships into permanent debt. They gave once, you give continuously, but somehow their single act of support weighs more than your years of devotion. Their occasional help matters more than your consistent presence. Their rare sacrifice counts more than your daily ones. The mathematics of manipulation, where one never equals one. Watch how they frame past actions. I helped you move 5 years ago becomes justification for expecting your help every week now. I lent you money once becomes the reason for unlimited emotional support forever. I was there during your crisis becomes an excuse for never being there during your ordinary needs. This is the reciprocity illusion. Past acts become lifetime leverage. Their temporary support becomes your permanent obligation. And questioning this arrangement becomes proof of your ingratitude. They've created a system where their past kindness justifies current extraction, while your current devotion never builds credit for future reciprocity. You're always giving to repay debts they've already collected multiple times, always sacrificing to prove appreciation for things that happened years ago, always available to honor obligations they've already exceeded the value of. But here's what they're counting on, you never calculating: the actual balance sheet of reciprocity. If you totaled your giving versus theirs, their receiving versus yours, your presence versus their absence, the illusion would shatter instantly. They avoid this accounting with careful language. I've always been there for you. Sounds like consistent support. The reality: they were present during 2 crises over 10 years while you've been present daily. I'd do anything for you sounds like devotion. The reality: they've never actually been asked to do the difficult things you do regularly without being asked. The reciprocity illusion operates through selective memory and strategic framing. They remember vividly what they've given. They conveniently forget what you've given. They amplify their sacrifices. They minimize yours. They keep you focused on owing them while never acknowledging what they owe you. This creates perpetual one-sided obligation disguised as mutual support. You give because you owe. They receive because they're owed. And the balance never shifts because the accounting system is rigged from the start. Consider how genuine reciprocity operates. Both people give freely without tracking. Both people receive gratefully without entitlement. Both people recognize when imbalance occurs and work to address it. Neither person uses past kindness as justification for current extraction. Now consider weaponized reciprocity. One person gives freely while the other gives strategically. One person receives gratefully, while the other receives as expected. One person notices imbalance and gives more, while the other notices imbalance and demands more. Past kindness becomes permanent leverage rather than mutual history. They've convinced you that loyalty means endless giving without expecting equal return. That devotion means accepting whatever they offer without asking for more. That commitment means staying regardless of how little they commit to you. This isn't reciprocity. This is extraction with mathematical precision. They calculated how much to give to establish the hook, how much to withhold to maintain control, how often to show up to keep you hoping, how often it is disappointing to keep trying harder. The obligation you feel is manufactured through careful deployment of occasional kindness mixed with consistent unavailability. They're there just enough to maintain the connection, absent enough to ensure you're always reaching, giving just enough to keep you obligated, taking enough to ensure their needs stay prioritized. You're not in a relationship of mutual support. You're in a system of managed extraction where your loyalty is the resource being mined and their minimal investment is the tool keeping you compliant. The reciprocity illusion convinces you that questioning this imbalance makes you ungrateful, that expecting equal investment makes you demanding, that wanting mutual devotion makes you selfish. Meanwhile, they question nothing, expect everything, and want unlimited access to your loyalty while offering limited access to theirs. This one-sided obligation doesn't exist in isolation. It works because they've carefully structured your world to ensure you don't recognize the imbalance. By removing your ability to see it clearly, they've made you dependent on their validation while positioning themselves as your only reliable source of connection. This is isolation masquerading as intimacy. Number 5. Isolation as strategy. They don't fear your independence, they architect your dependence. Strategic isolation doesn't look like control. It looks like care, like special connection, like us against the world. This is how they separate you from perspective while convincing you they're bringing you closer. They don't directly forbid other relationships. That would expose the manipulation. Instead, they create conditions where maintaining other connections becomes difficult, uncomfortable, or guilt-inducing. They make you choose them repeatedly while framing each choice as your preference rather than their requirement. Watch the subtle mechanisms. They need you during times you'd normally see friends. They create crises during family events. They express hurt when you prioritize others. They question the motives of people who care about you. Slowly, systematically, they become your primary connection while other relationships fade from neglect. This isolation serves a specific purpose. Other people might notice the imbalance, might question why you give so much, might recognize the exploitation you've been conditioned to accept. So they need you separated from an outside perspective. They accomplish this through carefully deployed doubt about others' intentions. Does that friend really understand you like I do? Your family just doesn't get you. Those people don't appreciate what you do for them. They position themselves as your only true ally, while painting everyone else as unreliable, unsupportive, or actively working against your interests. But here's the pattern that most never connect. The more isolated you become, the more normal the exploitation feels. Without outside perspective, their treatment becomes your baseline. Without comparison points, you accept what you'd never have accepted before. This is isolation as strategic architecture. Not dramatic severing of relationships, but gradual erosion of connections until they're your primary source of validation, support, and reality confirmation. And when they're your only mirror, you only see what they want you to see. They've trained you to feel guilty for investing in other relationships, to feel like you're betraying them when you're present for others, to feel like time away from them is time stolen from them. Meanwhile, they maintain whatever connections serve them without similar guilt or obligation. The isolation manifests in your decision-making patterns. Before making plans, you check their schedule. Before committing to others, you ensure they're comfortable. Before prioritizing yourself, you make sure they're taken care of. Your choices revolve around their needs, while theirs revolve around their preferences. This creates complete dependence disguised as deep connection. You need their approval. You seek their validation. You fear their disappointment, not because the relationship is genuinely meaningful, but because they've structured your world so they're the center of it. Consider what happens when you try to rebuild outside connections. They don't forbid it directly. They just become needier during those times, more crisis-prone, more demanding of your attention. They make maintaining other relationships so exhausting that isolation becomes the path of least resistance. They've weaponized your devotion by ensuring you have nowhere else to direct it, by making your loyalty exclusive to them, by creating conditions where spreading your attention feels like spreading yourself too thin, while they spread their attention wherever benefits them most. The appreciation they showed initially has transformed into expectation. Your presence is no longer valued, it's required. Your support is no longer appreciated, it's assumed. Your loyalty is no longer honored, it's exploited. And you police yourself better than they ever could because they've taught you that maintaining connection means maintaining their comfort above all else. This isolation works because it happens gradually. First, they're your favorite person, then your closest person, then you're the only person who really gets you, until you wake up one day and realize everyone else has faded away and you're completely dependent on someone who gives you barely enough to survive, while taking everything you have to give. And this connects to something we'll explore deeper in the next lesson: the psychology of manufactured obligation, and how they make you feel responsible for their emotional state while taking no responsibility for yours. But first, you need to understand how to break this pattern, because recognition without action is awareness without power. And they're counting on you staying aware but trapped. Number 6, breaking the pattern. Withdrawing loyalty from someone who weaponized it feels like betrayal because they trained you to confuse devotion with identity. This is the final trap. Not the exploitation itself, but the guilt that appears. When you try to escape it, they've conditioned you so thoroughly that protecting yourself feels like attacking them. That self-preservation feels like abandonment. Those boundaries feel like punishment. The guilt you experience when establishing limits isn't conscience, it's conditioning. It's every moment they deploy guilt when you are questioned, every time they framed your needs as rejection, every instance they made your self-protection about their victimization. The guilt they trained you to feel is how they keep the trap closed, even when you've recognized it exists. Breaking the pattern requires understanding a fundamental truth. Loyalty to someone who exploits it is loyalty misplaced. Devotion to someone who weaponizes it is devotion wasted. Commitment to someone who uses it against you is commitment that destroys you. This isn't cynicism, this is clarity. The difference between giving up on connection and giving up on exploitation. Between abandoning relationships and abandoning self-destruction. Between losing loyalty and reclaiming agency. Here's the forbidden truth they never want you to grasp. Your loyalty was never the problem. Their exploitation of it was. Your devotion was never a weakness. Their weaponization of it was. Your commitment was never wrong. Their abuse of it was. You don't need to become less loyal. You need to become more selective about who deserves your loyalty. You don't need to stop giving. You need to stop giving to those who only take. You don't need to eliminate devotion. You need to redirect it toward those who honor it instead of harvest it. Breaking the pattern means accepting uncomfortable truths. That person you've given everything to has given you barely enough to maintain the connection. That relationship you thought was mutual has been one-sided extraction disguised as partnership. That loyalty you believed was valued has been exploited as a predictable resource. The difficulty isn't recognizing these truths. The difficulty is acting on them despite the conditioning that makes action feel like betrayal. They've taught you that boundaries equal disloyalty, that self-protection equals selfishness, that questioning exploitation equals lacking gratitude. None of this is true, but they needed you to believe it, because if you recognize that healthy relationships celebrate boundaries, support self-protection, and welcome honest questioning, you'd see their demands for what they are. Control masquerading as connection, extraction disguised as a relationship, manipulation hidden behind words of devotion. Breaking the pattern requires practical steps most avoid because the conditioning makes them feel impossible. First, acknowledge the imbalance without justifying it. No more explaining away why they never reciprocate. No more excuses why you always sacrifice. No more rationalizing why the relationship only flows one direction. Second, establish boundaries, knowing they'll respond with guilt deployment. Expect it. Prepare for it. Recognize it as manipulation rather than genuine hurt. When they say, "I guess I'm not important to you," understand this is tactical guilt designed to restore their access to your devotion without requiring their reciprocity. Third, reduce your availability and watch their response. Genuine connection adapts, exploitation demands. If they can't handle you having needs, boundaries, or limits, they never valued your well-being. They valued your usefulness. Fourth, rebuild outside connections they've made you neglect. Regain perspective they've made you lose. Remember who you were before they became the center of your world. The isolation was strategic. The reconnection is threatening. Their response will reveal everything. Fifth, stop explaining or justifying your boundaries. Boundaries aren't negotiations. They're statements of what you will and won't accept. Those who respect you accept them. Those who exploit you fight them. The loyalty trap only works while you believe withdrawing from exploitation equals betraying connection. The moment you recognize that true connection never requires self-destruction, the trap loses its power. Not its presence, its power. Remember this. Loyalty they weaponize is devotion they never earned. Recognition is not cynicism. It's clarity protecting what remains. Breaking the pattern isn't about becoming cold. It's about becoming conscious, about directing devotion toward those who honor it instead of harvesting it. You're not betraying them by protecting yourself. They betrayed you by exploiting your protection of them. Number 7, the Machiavellian awareness. To recognize exploitation is to reclaim agency. This is where all principles converge, where weaponized devotion, tactical guilt, reciprocity illusion, and strategic isolation reveal themselves as interconnected mechanisms of the same system, a system designed to extract from your loyalty while ensuring you never question the arrangement. Machiavellian awareness isn't about becoming manipulative. It's about recognizing manipulation, not about exploiting others, but about seeing exploitation clearly, not about weaponizing loyalty, but about understanding when yours has been weaponized against you. They studied you before you studied them. They recognized your capacity for devotion before you recognized their capacity for exploitation. They understood the mechanics of loyalty before you understood the mechanics of manipulation. This gave them an advantage. Recognition removes that advantage. The patterns we've examined aren't isolated tactics. They're an integrated strategy. Weaponized devotion establishes the foundation. Your loyalty becomes their leverage. Tactical guilt maintains the system. Your self-protection becomes their victimization. Reciprocity illusion justifies extraction. Their minimal giving becomes your maximum obligation. Strategic isolation removes escape routes. Their presence becomes your only connection. Each mechanism reinforces the others. The guilt makes questioning the imbalance feel wrong. The imbalance makes isolation feel necessary. Who else would tolerate you being so demanding? The isolation makes the guilt more effective. No outside perspective to challenge it. The weaponized devotion makes all of it feel like love. This is the architecture of exploitation, disguised as relationships. Systematic extraction presented as mutual connection. Calculated manipulation framed as emotional closeness. And you've been living inside this structure, believing it was home. Machiavellian awareness reveals the difference between complexity and confusion. Healthy relationships are complex. They involve navigating needs, boundaries, conflicts, growth. Exploitative relationships create confusion. They involve questioning reality, doubting yourself, explaining away mistreatment, justifying imbalance. Complexity you can navigate. Confusion is the tool they use to keep you disoriented, because if you're constantly confused about whether you're giving enough, being loyal enough, proving devotion enough, you never have clarity to recognize that you're giving everything while receiving barely enough to survive. Recognition is power, not because it changes them, but because it changes your response to them. You can't unsee the patterns once you've seen them, can't know the mechanisms once you've understood them, can't return to blind loyalty once you've developed conscious awareness. This is why they fear your recognition more than your anger. Anger can be manipulated through guilt. Recognition can't. Anger is emotional. Recognition is strategic. Anger they can use against you. See how you treat me. Recognition protects you from that manipulation. I see what you're doing. The Machiavellian awareness we're cultivating isn't about retaliation. It's about protection. Not about harming them, but about stopping them from harming you. Not about manipulation, but about seeing manipulation clearly enough to no longer be controlled by it. Every principle we've examined gives you a lens for recognition. When they deploy guilt, you recognize the invisible leash being tightened. When they reference past acts, you recognize the reciprocity illusion being activated. When they monopolize your time, you recognize isolation being architected. When they demand unlimited loyalty while offering conditional presence, you recognize weaponized devotion in motion. This awareness doesn't make you cynical. It makes you conscious, doesn't make you cold, makes you clear, doesn't eliminate your capacity for loyalty, redirects it toward that worthy of it. The final recognition is this: they need your blindness more than they need your loyalty, because conscious loyalty has boundaries. Aware devotion has limits. Strategic commitment has reciprocity requirements. All things exploitation can't survive. Your loyalty was never the weapon. Your inability to recognize when it was being weaponized was. Now you have recognition. Now you have awareness. Now you have the ability to see the patterns they hoped stayed invisible. The mechanisms they disguised as care, the extraction they framed as a connection, the exploitation they called love. What you do with this awareness determines whether recognition becomes power or just painful knowledge. Let's bring this together. Loyalty weaponized against you is devotion disguised as obligation. Recognition is not cynicism, it's clarity protecting what remains. They transform your loyalty into leverage through guilt that conditions compliance, reciprocity illusion that manufactures permanent debt, and isolation that removes perspective. Each mechanism working together to ensure your devotion flows one direction while extraction flows the other. The patterns are visible now. Weaponized devotion, tactical guilt deployment, one-sided obligation disguised as mutual support. Strategic isolation masquerading as a special connection. Each one a layer of exploitation you've been trained to accept as normal. If this opened your eyes to the pattern, hit like. Drop your biggest recognition in the comments. Share this with someone still giving more than they receive. Remember, loyalty they weaponize is devotion they never earned. Recognition is the first step to reclaiming what you freely gave to those who strategically took. Your capacity for loyalty isn't weakness. Their exploitation of it is, you don't need less devotion. You need more discernment about who deserves it. And in the next lesson, you'll discover how to rebuild boundaries without burning bridges, the art of protecting yourself while staying strategic. The difference between cutting people off and cutting off their access to exploitation.